As you may already know, I played God in Hollywood movies twice, in Bruce Almighty and Eben Almighty. But what you may not know is how I prepared myself for such a daunting task. www.rushbiblestudy.com. Tuesday night, Dream City Church's Glendale campus.
Surmising last week's lesson in Genesis, we had God created everything. We have the 7 days of creation, the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve put in the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve fall. They start having kids. It goes south pretty quick. Everyone's fighting everybody. The Bible says the earth was filled with violence. And God decides to wipe the earth, start over again, saving Noah and his family, and God wipes out the earth. That takes that whole nightmare, 40 days and 40 nights, as you already know from the test, of rain, and a year in the ark or so, maybe a week or two more, something like that, I believe. And the earth repopulates, doesn't take them long. God tells them to fill the earth, and they stay in one place, which makes God mad. And so he confounds their language at the Tower of Babel. Nimrod gets involved. It's a nightmare. And finally, God finds somebody who really, really is serving him, imperfect as he was, but trying. And that's where we are today. God has finally let the dust settle. A long period of time, several hundred years has passed since the flood. And God finally calms down from just wiping everything out. Not just people, but animals. He wiped off, just killed everything. That's how upset he was. And then he picks one guy and says, you know what? I can work with this one. And this is where we pick up in Genesis today. Starting in chapter 12, in verse 1, and I'm going to be the first. Now the Lord said to Abram, get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred, from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse them that curseth thee. And in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. So Abraham departed, as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. And Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their substance that they had gathered, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran. And they went forth to go into the land of Canaan, and into the land of Canaan they came. Abraham and Lot go to the promised land. Now Canaan, there was a very bad famine, so they decide to boogie into Egypt. Stacy is voluntarily passing. The role of videographer is burden. It's heavy as the head that wears the crown.
And holding the glass.
I'll just explain that. Whenever you see Talmudic, Mishnah, which is rabbinical dialogue about scripture, like Mishnah is like a collection of thousands of years of rabbinic dialogue. It'll be like what I did here. This would be considered in a Jewish church Mishnah. Like you have scripture and then my comments and scripture is scripture. That's canon. And this is like someone's opinion, right? That's Mishnah. Whenever Mishnah and early Christian writing and theologians agree, that carries a lot of weight for me because they're closer to the original language, dialogue, and culture of what's happening in Scripture. And I could cite maybe 13 or 14 different sources early sources in the church and the Babylonian Talmud on this, what I'm going to say next. Most early scholarship was Melchizedek is Noah's son Shem. If you follow the age of the patriarchs and the genealogies, Shem dies within a month of Isaac dying. That's how long he lived after the flood. So this guy here, Melchizedek, one of the reasons nobody touched him, and when Abraham went, gave him 10% of everything, is Noah came through this is the son of Noah that came through the flood and was still alive. And just so you know, if you Google some of that, you'll find a berserk amount of literature backing that supposition up. And I strongly concur with that. Just so you know, if you're ever curious about that, I've heard people say that it was Jesus. Because in Hebrews it says Jesus was a priest like Melchizedek. But Melchizedek wasn't worshipped. Wouldn't let that happen. So, but he did pay tithes to him. And what makes Melchizedek and Jesus similar, what I believe that's referring to be a priest after the order of Melchizedek, in the Constitution for a Nation of Israel, which is a book of Leviticus, there is a strong separation of church and state. That's where we get in our Constitution. If you read Practices and Procedures from our Constitution, from our Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., it records the debates of how they came up with our Declaration of Independence and our Bill of Rights and our Constitution. They're still recorded today, both the word and the deed of everything that happens there, every word spoken in the House and Senate. And when they were talking about this, they quoted the book of Leviticus in that separation of the church and state, and they use those passages that the priest cannot have an army and cannot be the head of the kingdom, the money and the army and all that. And the king cannot offer sacrifices. The king's not, there has to be a separation. Because religious people and politicians are lunatics, just between us. They're the craziest of the crazy, these two. There is a clear separation of church and state. And in authority, not in participation, the government should be involved in the church and helping the church and tax abatements and all that kind of stuff is good. And the church should have a positive effect on its government and its people and forming laws and whatnot. But there's a clear separation of that authority. And that comes out after all of this happened. This is Abraham. You have to go another 400 some years before, more than that, 500 years or so, before they're coming out of Egypt with Moses and they get the law. This is before the law. And Melchizedek is a king and a priest. And that's what they're talking about in Hebrews, where Jesus is, we have a priest, not like the temple, but a priest after the order of Melchizedek. He's a king and a priest in one man. Jesus can do it. Jesus can be a king and a priest and do both perfectly. If me or Jonathan get that much authority, just put your seatbelt on. It's going to be a rough ride.